قال أمير المؤمنين: ولولا الأجل الذي كتب الله عليهم لم تستقر أرواحهم في أجسادهم طرفة عين، شوقا إلى العذاب، شوقا إلى الثواب وخوفا من العقاب. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Now, when death is talked about and death is discussed, the general reaction is that it brings about a gloomy ambience into the congregation. People feel down. People feel, why this discussion? Why do we have to bring up the discussion of morbidity? Why can't we talk about life and living life? But this isn't the case with everyone. Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam says that the righteous, that the muttaqi, he says, وَلَوْلَا الْأَجَلِ الذي كتب الله عليهم لم تستقر. Now, if they didn't have an expiry date, if they didn't have a time to die, that their souls would not remain in their bodies. Why would their souls not remain in their bodies? Firstly, let's look at why are people not wanting to die just quickly? People don't want to die because they're afraid to meet up with what they've done in the hereafter. They're afraid to meet up with the results of their actions. Right now they're still living in the fantasy world, just as you would have the people that go to the pubs on the weekend or after work that drink, so they can go into this imaginary world, this fantasy world, that they can escape reality. Likewise with those that go out and buy their lottery tickets and they gamble so they can establish a fantasy world, that it's all about having this money, that they live this dream. All they think about is living that dream. That's why people deal drugs, people do all these things. They don't think about that consequence that they encounter, that they will encounter. As for the righteous, they know what they've done. They know what awaits them on the other side. This is why they want to leave. You know, when you're at work and it starts getting close to the final hour of work, you know that feeling you get that's going to be over, I'm going to go home? They feel more than that. As death nears by, they feel it's time to meet up with the results. It's time to see the fruits of their labor. It's payday. It's time to see what they've done. This is one reason that they don't want to remain in their bodies. The other is what? Out of fear of punishment. Fear of punishment, thinking of just the punishment. Without them, they know they won't be punished. They know from what they have done, but that fear that the possibility exists. I need to have that fear that that possibility exists. That's what keeps you on the righteous path. I can't be someone that has hope in God's mercy without having fear in God's punishment. If you look at Al-Dhunub al-Kabira, that's written by Sayyid Dasghaib, in this book, it speaks about the greatest sins. Obviously, the greatest of all sins is shirku billah, wal-'iyadhu billah, to take partners in God. But when you look at the other sins that stand on the highest parts of greater sins that are considered, one of them is despondence or despairing from God's mercy. To give up on God's mercy. To think I've committed so much I can never be forgiven. Even though the Quran's very clear that when God speaks to those that He wants to forgive, He doesn't say, you'll know this from the dua. You've been here every night listening to these du'as. Ilahi waqaf as-sa'iluna. That those that ask you God are standing. They're standing before you. They're standing on the shores of God's mercy. But if you, O Allah, are not going to forgive except the ones that fasted and stood and upheld their praise, what is it for? What is left for who? The ones that are disobedient. Allah Azza wa Jal, He speaks in the Quran. He doesn't say, قُلْ لِعِبَادِيَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أو قُلْ لِعِبَادِيَ الَّذِينَ أَقَامُوا الصَّلَاةِ. He doesn't say this. He says, قُلْ لِعِبَادِيَ الَّذِينَ أَسْرَفُوا عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ. Tell my servants. The ones that asrafu means the ones that have committed the 7 deadly sins, basically. The ones that have committed every sin. Don't give up in the mercy of God. God forgives every sin. This is why of the greatest sins is despondence, to despair in God's mercy. How can you despair when He's talking to the worst people and says, don't give up? So how can I despair? Then, on the other hand, one of also the greatest sins is Al-Amn min makrillah. For me to think I'm safe from God's punishment. You should be in a state that if you knew that only one person will enter paradise, you should have enough hope that that person is you. That's the state you should be in. And if you know that only one person will enter that fire of hell, you should have enough fear that that person will be you. It's a balance. I need to keep that balance in my life. This is where the muttaqi is at. The muttaqi is at that balance, because if I fear that I may go to hell, I won't commit that sin. Because I may think this may be that point of no return. This may be the sin that I never wake up from. Many people, upon taking up an action, they reflect. The first time when you're about to do something, why do you think you have to reply immediately and say, I don't want to do this? Don't allow for the devil to make it out for you that, it's not that bad. You can deal drugs. When you die, they'll probably build a hospital for you in your name. This is what happens with the leftover money. They think like that. You can steal from the rich, because they're rich, they got so much, they're not going to feel it. See, the devil starts giving you ideas. The guy's worth 100 mil, I stole 100,000. What's the big problem with that? But I don't realize where this is going to lead. Firstly, a person that has $100 million won't forgive you with $1 on the day of judgment if you steal it from them. That's why they have 100 mil. You need to think about the consequences of your actions. And that at any point, I'm accountable for this. If you notice, hope in Allah's mercy and the fear of punishment. This is why a prophet is mentioned in the Quran to have 2 qualities. First, you need to remember that if you purchase an item, any item, you have at the back it says caution, warning, or aktung, or something like that. It's written at the back. You've probably seen this 1,000,000 times. You see it on work equipment. You see warning, it's got someone's fingers being severed or chopped up or something. You see there's a warning. There's a warning in every instruction manual that do not swallow this. Do not let kids touch this. Do not put this next to water. There's something or another. Even when it comes to every day-to-day activities, going to work. Do you have warnings on what you can and can't do? People have a problem when it comes to the warnings given by God. Lal asaf. People always come up and say, why is this haram? They question, why is it? I've never seen someone come up and go up to either Parliament House or whoever writes out the laws, whoever dictates these laws, come up and say, listen, why is there no right turn into this street? They don't. They see no right turn. Fine, I keep driving. I'll get an infringement notice, I keep driving. You know, have you ever seen those traffic lights that are useless? They're there and you go, why is this traffic light here? But it goes red, you stop. You don't sit and say to yourself, this is a useless traffic light, I'm going to go through it. You abide by these laws. You live with these laws and you never question these laws. People never question anything because they've been warned they will receive an infringement notice. They've been warned that this could be, for example, when you were traveling, when I was coming from Lebanon to Australia, I got onto the website looking at what I can bring into this country and what is the consequences if I bring a certain thing. You read, 5 years jail, $50,000 fine, $5,000 fine. You read all this and you say, all right, I'm not doing that. Why can we not deal the same when it comes to God's law? Why can't I look at God's law and I read God's law in that same manner? That I turn to God's law in that same manner? Because God's law is vivid. It's not misunderstood. There's probably one or two things people can't understand. But when Allah Azza wa Jal says don't lie or don't steal or don't drink alcohol, there's no ambiguity, there's nothing that is confusing to stop. You can't turn around and tell me alcohol is a good thing. You cannot turn around and say, why would, if alcohol was a good thing, why would they put in their advertising, drink responsibly? Have you ever seen an advertisement for any product that you consume, be it a drink, be it a food, where it says, for example, eat pizza responsibly? Why not? Why doesn't it say that on an advertising for something other than alcohol or gambling? Why does it say drink responsibly? Why does it say gamble responsibly? Because they know the evils of these two things. They know where alcohol leads to. Just sit there and go. I've mentioned this many years ago, that I've still got articles from the newspapers. I used to have a habit when I was in high school. I collected articles from the Leader or some other bogus newspapers, but I'd collect the articles that had any relation to alcohol or gambling. One of the articles I got where a man stabbed his sister-in-law about 7 or 8 times because he was drunk. But he was so extremely drunk that he was prevented from drinking for 3 years. You got to read the punishment. He stabbed her to death. But everyone that was witness to this crime said that he was so intoxicated he did not know what he was doing. So basically it wasn't him that did it. He's not the criminal. It was the alcohol. They made fun of Sheikh Tej when he blamed the cat and the meat, and he said, you blame the meat, not the cat. Well, they do the same. They blame the alcohol, not the person. They blame the inanimate object. They blame the one that cannot speak for itself. You can't bring it to stand, yet they mock when someone says the same thing. When the Sheikh at Lakimba Mosque mentioned that it was, who do I blame, the cat or the meat? And they said, look, he blamed the meat. The meat shouldn't have been there. This is the example that they used, yet they, that he used the exact same example. You commit a crime, it's alcohol caused. They say he was driving under the influence of alcohol. I would accept if someone tied him to a chair and poured the alcohol down his throat. Who chose to drink the alcohol? He did. So there was no one that forced him to do this. However, when it comes to warning, Allah Azza wa Jal says in the Quran, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا سَوَاءٌ عَلَيْهِمْ أَأَنذَرْتَهُمْ أَمْ لَمْ تُنذِرْهُمْ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. He makes it clear. Those, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا, He's speaking about those that have rejected the signs, those that reject God, those that reject Islam. Whether you warn them or you don't warn them, they will not believe. So in other words, you're wasting your time. You know, they remain in the same state, they're being warned, they don't accept, I'm going over. And you know, when sometimes even there are some people like this. There are believers like this, people that are Muslims. We'll look at, for example, a father and son relationship. Father says, son, don't do this. Son, don't do this. Son, and the son keeps repeating and repeating and repeating. You think, man, what's he talking to? A vegetable? This person's been repeating and repeating and repeating these warnings. Yet, this is the case in most of mankind. Warning after warning, no one awakes to these warnings. Allah Azza wa Jal, when He speaks about the prophets, He mentions, for example, in His verse, وَلَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا نُوحًا إِلَىٰ قَوْمِهِ إِنِّي لَكُمْ نَذِيرٌ مُبِينٌ. That he came to his people, Noah came to the people, and he said that I am a warner. I'm an open warner. I'm here to warn you. Why was he an open warner? Because he would show them the effects if they did not listen to the warning. There was a punishment to come. See, even in the case of other prophets, they came and they warned. However, Allah Azza wa Jal, when He speaks about prophets like Nuh and Musa, their warning came with a chastisement. Where He says in the Quran, فَانْتَقَمْنَا. Listen to the words. فَانْتَقَمْنَا speaks about vengeance. This is a vengeance of God to the people of Fir'aun. مِنْهُمْ فَأَغْرَقْنَاهُمْ فِي الْيَمِّ بِأَنَّهُمْ كَذَّبُوا بِآيَاتِنَا وَكَانُوا عَنْهَا غَافِلِينَ. This is their punishment here. Don't even think about what their punishment's over there. This is just the entree. This is just the introduction to what awaits them. He says because we warned them. How much did He warn them? He warned them more than you could imagine. And they rejected the signs. Now, what is the warning about? The verse in the Quran says, وَأَنذِرِ النَّاسِ يَوْمَ يَأْتِيهِمْ وَأَنذِرِ النَّاسِ يَوْمَ يَأْتِيهِمْ الْعَذَابُ فَيَقُولُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا رَبَّنَا أَخِّرْنَا إِلَى أَجَلٍ قَرِيبٍ نجب دعوتك ونتبع الرسل أولم تكونوا أقسمتم من قبل ما لكم من زوال. The verse here speaks about to the Prophet to warn them of what? The day of punishment. And in this warning, he tells them that you will say, the oppressors, those that have oppressed themselves, those that have oppressed others, will say on this day. So he's not only warning them of the fire of hell and the punishment and the ramifications and consequences of their actions, but he's warning them of what they will say. He's saying, when you are there, you're going to say, bring us back. When you are there, we'll have another go. You will say this. I'm warning you now so you don't have to. I'm saving you from wasting your time and saying this. Tonight and tomorrow night and the night after. These are your last 3 nights of this month. These are your last 3 nights of making amends. If you aren't forgiven in this month, you have nothing left but Hajj. You have Arafah. Arafah is the guarantee. When you go to Arafah, Arafah is where you go when you walk back out and you know your sins are forgiven. But these 3 nights are the last nights that you have to make amends. To make amends with yourself, to be true to yourself. These people, the righteous people, were people that were always in a state of realization of their position. How frail and fragile they are. How weak they are. How in need they are of God's mercy. How something so simple, yet they think it's so small, could cost them a position in paradise. And something so small could grant them paradise, as in the opposite. So in these nights you need to turn. You need to turn to God. And then supplication that we read, and I was going to mention self-supplication last night, but I wanted to use it in the final nights, that we read on the day of Mubahala. That he says, Allahumma in kanat dhunubi qad akhlaqat wajhi andak. That my sins, see, these sins have basically turned my face, have kept my face away from you. That you're not someone that answers from me anymore. You know, sometimes you put yourself in a position where you're not looked at anymore. I mentioned last night that those that don't supplicate God during comfort and wait for hard times, they wait for hard times. What happens? The angels block them off because they say, this voice is strange to us. We did not hear this voice at the times of comfort. Now we hear him when he has a problem. So he says, this is my problem. My face has been closed off. What do I need to do to get my prayers accepted again? To get my supplication? He says, وَحَالَتْ بَيْنِي وَبَيْنَكَ وَغَيَّرْتَ حَالِي عَنْدَكَ. So in other words, my condition, where I was with you, has changed. So then he says, فَإِنِّي أَسْأَلُكَ بِنُورِ وَجْهِكَ. That I ask you by the illuminance of your face. And then he says, الَّذِي لَا يُطْفَأ, meaning the direction of God, this light that does not extinguish. And then he says, وَبِوَجْهِ مُحَمَّدٍ حَبِيبِكَ. That I ask in that wajhi, meaning that position and that status that they have with regard to God. I have to ask in their name. This is the only way. When someone says that you can't ask in their name, speak to God directly. You know, sometimes you're at the grave in Medina al-Munawwara, he says, don't look towards the Prophet, speak to God directly. Don't turn towards the Prophet, speak to God directly. Even though Allah Azza wa Jal says, وَابْتَغِي إِلَيْهِ الْوَسِيلَةِ, that I'm supposed to look for a means to do dua. That's why when we see each other, what do we ask each other? ادعي لي. قلدناك الدعاء والزيارة. نسألك دعاء ادعي لنا. We ask people, please supplicate for us. Why? We ask another believer to supplicate. There are many stories when it comes to tawassul. One story that is a really nice story that comes with this area of tawassul. And this links us also to last night and how a person, when they are saved from something, they forget how it really happened. You know, we make an excuse, oh, this happened because of, you know, for example, you have a court case, you do supplication, you do tawassul, and then everything falls into place. And a person comes out, he doesn't say, this was helped. Like a person that I know had a court case, a driving infringement. And he said when he entered the courtroom, his lawyer said to him, get ready to hand in your driver's license. You're finished, this is really bad. He said, when I sat and I witnessed the case, he goes, the lawyer, he said, sorry, when he said that to me, he said, I looked up and I said, Ya Fatima. He said, Ya Fatima al-Zahra, help me with this. He said, he said the first name I could think of was Fatima. I said, yeah, Fatima, help me with this. He said, when I entered and I sat down, he said, the lawyer delivered an Academy Award winning performance. He absolutely destroyed the case. And they threw the case out. And he said, a slight thought came to me that what? This lawyer did an unbelievable job. He said, but the lawyer reminded me with a word he said. He said, when we were walking out, he said, all that I said was a load of so-and-so. He said, I don't know who you know, but someone helped you here. This is what the lawyer said. He said, basically, that's what I was doing, a performance, but you know someone. To remind him, this wasn't by chance. Now, in this case, this man at the time was in Samurat. This other story, the story I want to speak about. And there was a man by the name of Musa. Usually they call him Ibn al-Bagha, but they don't call him Musa. They don't usually, like, you know, when we say Al-Ma'mun, even though his name's Abdullah Al-Ma'mun, they say Al-Ma'mun. Or Muhammad Al-Amin, they say Al-Amin. They don't bother recalling these names, even though both these names are nice names. They don't know what name to give them. This man was one of the right-hand men and representatives of Al-Mutawakkil Al-Abbasi. This guy, they equate his character, when you read in history, to like the character of Saddam today. He was someone people wouldn't breathe without thinking in his presence. He enters the shop of a man that is a stone setter. He makes rings and sets stones. And he puts a stone before him, an expensive and lucrative stone. He says, I want you to make a ring for this stone. So this man's like in fear. And he says, and I'll pay you well. This man's not worried about the money. He's just worried that this all finishes properly and there's no issue in the matter. So he takes the stone and he finishes carving it out, polishing it off and setting it in a stone, in a ring properly. As he's working to make sure it sets properly, he strikes it just a bit too hard because he's worried. And the stone splits in two. And you know what happens with these types of people, these tyrants. So this man becomes in a state of madness. What do I do? This person will kill me. He is known for killing people. Remember, Samurat is a garrison town. This is a town where soldiers live. It's a town where it's a military town. That this isn't a place where it's like an everyday town, like if you were in Baghdad or something. But also being held under house arrest in that town is Al-Imam Ali ibn Muhammad al-Hadi, salawatullahi wa salam alayhi, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So he walks in and says to the Imam, I have a problem and it's in your hand, no one else. This is left in your hand, get me out of this. The Imam says, what's the problem? He tells him the story. And the Imam tells him, turn to Allah Azza wa Jal and supplicate, and I will supplicate for you. Now go. Khalas, he put his affair in the hands of the Imam. He returns, supplicates to God. Then the soldier of the guard of Ibn al-Bagha comes to him and says, listen, he wants to see you. So he's shaking and all. He's on his way. He arrives. So Ibn al-Bagha is sitting and says, this stone that I gave you, he said it was for one of my bondsmaids. Now another one that I also like is jealous of her, knowing that she's going to get this. If it's not a problem for you, can you make 2 rings? And I'll pay you double when you make these 2 rings. It's already split into 2. Some people will think, oh, see what happened? It turned out that it was for 2 people. No. This is how the tawassul works. Allah Azza wa Jal makes asbab, just like He makes means for things to happen. It's just like when I ask for sustenance, I don't wait for the money to rain down from the heavens. Allah makes a means for the money to get to you. Allah makes a way how this money came to me, how this opportunity arrived. Allah sets the ways. There are Christians saying, they used to always say the Lord works in mysterious ways. This is the way things happen. Allah Azza wa Jal does things, but He does them through ways, through reasons. And this man was able not only to avoid being tortured and killed, but also doubled his wages just by turning to that doorway. These people tell you not to turn towards this doorway. A man had a problem at the time of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. And the Imam said to him, he said, ask Rasulullah. And he said, Ya Sayyidi, Rasulullah is not alive. He's passed on. Imam was around. When was he around? He was around 150 years, 160 years after Rasulullah. So he was around much later than Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam. And this man saying what? He says to the Imam, how can I talk to Rasulullah if he's passed away so long ago? And the Imam doesn't tell him so, oh Allah, in the name of Rasulullah. He says, say, Ya Muhammad, Ya Rasulullah. He says, speak directly. This is a narration. He says, speak directly to him. Call him by his name. This is the way He avails you. Allah Azza wa Jal likes some voices when they speak to Him. This is what's so important. Why must I turn to them? Because Allah likes to listen to a voice that's different to yours. That's why you ask people to do dua for you. And there is an effect of it. A big effect. Even when you were here on the nights of the 19th, the 21st and 23rd, and you put the Quran and you asked Allah in His name, in His messenger's name, and the other ma'sumin. Allah likes these certain people. Allah even likes the believers. That's why when you pray Salat al-Layl and you're praying Al-Witr and you're asking for Allah to forgive 40 believers, if a believer asks Allah, Allah will forgive those 40 believers for him. Because Allah favors this believer. He likes this believer. Even An-Nabi Dawood ala nabiyina wa alihi wa alayhi salam was known for his worship. He was a man that was known for his worship. That when he was in the temple, or back then they weren't referred to as masajid, but when he was in the house of worship, the house of God, because the house of worship is the house of God, he noticed the man that was there all the time worshipping. Day and night this man was worshipping. So he prayed for him, that this guy, mashallah, he worships all the time. And Jibreel came down and said, Ya Dawood, do not take too much to this man. Because this man is a mura'i. This man does riya. He only prays to show off. He's here just to pray as a show. So he returns, and upon returning, Nabi Dawood doesn't look towards the guy anymore. One day that man dies. Jibreel comes down and says, Ya Dawood, that man has passed. You did not attend his funeral. And he said, you told me that he was a mura'i. He said, yes, he was, and he died as a mura'i. He said, however, that when he died, 40 believers were there and testified that he was a believer. 40 believers attended his funeral and testified he was a believer. Because of this, his death became a celebration for the angels. That he was someone that was brought near. Why? Just for the testimony of who? 40 believers. This is why, obviously, this is from his action. He hasn't harmed these people. He might have been a mura'i when he was praying. This is obviously because he hasn't harmed these people. These people have come and testified. You turn towards God even through the righteous people. In your time now, you turn to your master, Al-Hujjat ibn al-Hasan al-Mahdi. Whenever you do any action, you ask through Al-Imam. If you need anything, ask through Imam al-Mahdi. You pray your morning prayers. You have a problem, before you think of how you're going to solve this problem, pray your morning prayers. After the morning prayers, supplicate for the Imam and ask through the Imam. This is how your prayers will be answered. This is how your prayers will be accepted. Finally, just to let you know, on the Day of Judgment, even the believer that has been chosen for paradise, Allah Azza wa Jal tells this believer, He tells this believer to pick out everyone that's helped him, even if they have given him some water to drink. This is why the mercy of God shall be so great in you. Take this person with you. Yani pick them and take them with you. This is why the thought of mercy of Allah should be so great. And that's why the muttaqi has that thought, that the mercy of Allah is in that position. That's why he's waiting to leave his body. His soul yearns for death. He awaits for his death because he knows where he's going to. This kind of mercy. But the same token, he knows the wrath of God. He knows there is accountability. He knows it so much it petrifies him that his body could even, his soul could leap out of his body with this thought. Once you're in this state where you feel this presence of God to the extent that His mercy is so great, and at the same token I may be punished for anything that I do, that's when you've reached that level where you are considered to be of the muttaqeen, of the righteous, of the pious, of those that are brought near to Allah Azza wa Jal. But I have to bring myself to that level. I have to have more hope in Allah's mercy. However, the hope always is above the fear. Even though that they're equal, because mercy is greater than the punishment of God. Allah Azza wa Jal's mercy is above everything. And that's why the Quran begins with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In 113 out of 114 surah, only one surah begins with Bara'. One surah begins mentioning the wrath of God. Also, whenever I say any supplication, the first thing I mention to God is what? The mercy of God. We ask God by showing us, Aflahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. We ask God by testifying to our frailty and to our weakness, and all that we have is His mercy. This is how our testimony is made. Tomorrow night, just to let you know, Saturday and Sunday night, after the English lecture, there will be a Q&A with Samahat Ayatollah Sayyid Hadi Mudarrisi. This is a very important opportunity that you will not know until it's surpassed you. For you to sit and be able to speak with a clergyman and a scholar of this status. Tomorrow night you have these 2 nights. As for tonight, barakallah fikum, that people are still attending the majalis, please remain to listen to the Arabic lecture. It's very important that we do, even if like I go over this several times, so that even though that I speak English, there's an opportunity that even the blessing of seating and being part of the audience is enough. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal. If anyone has any questions that they want, because the questions that will be looked at first. Yeah, you can have the questions in English, and the Sayyid can accommodate with that. Whether he uses Sayyid Mustafa or someone like that, it's not using me. But anyway, so you can write the questions in English. It's the people that actually write the questions will get priority over the people that are on the floor. Because that way we can assort the questions, because we want him to answer questions that are relevant and that are useful. I don't want someone to, we don't want him to get up and answer questions that have been answered over year and year and year, and they're repeated and are pointless. That is something that you'd write in Google and you get 200 responses for. Okay, so we'll leave that with that. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to forgive us our sins, and not to end this month without forgiving us all and granting us immunity from the fire of hell. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammad wa alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin.